Harley-Davidson is moving production of some of its motorcycles overseas to avoid new tariffs. The company says European Union tariffs on its motorcycles exported from the U.S. jumped from 6 to 31%.
I took on the job. We had to close down our company, or at least our manufacturing. So that was a crisis in itself. But it gave us the opportunity to really look at where our strengths are, where our weaknesses are.
Harley-Davidson, a brand long synonymous with American freedom and rebellion, finds itself at the center of a mounting economic storm. CEO Jochen Zeitz's recent announcement about the company's financial troubles has drawn a sharp spotlight onto a complex web of global trade dynamics that are now entangling one of America's most iconic manufacturers. The trouble stems not from a failure in branding or product design, but from the disruptive impact of newly imposed tariffs and the retaliatory responses they triggered across international markets. These trade barriers, introduced following a series of policy moves by former President Donald Trump, have dramatically altered the cost structures and profit margins of companies that operate on a global scale, and Harley-Davidson, with its large international customer base and reliance on cross-border manufacturing components, is one of the hardest hit. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The heart of the problem lies in the strategic positioning of Harley-Davidson. For decades, the company has relied on its strong export market. Europe in particular has been a crucial revenue stream, with thousands of European enthusiasts purchasing the brand's heavyweight motorcycles every year. However, the imposition of tariffs on trade partners by the United States, in the name of protecting domestic industries, has not only resulted in higher costs for imported components, but also prompted swift retaliatory tariffs from other nations. In the case of the European Union, tariffs on American motorcycles jumped from 6% to as high as 31%, with threats of further increases. This exponential rise in tariffs immediately rendered Harley-Davidson's bikes significantly more expensive in those markets, eroding their competitive advantage and pricing them out of reach for many potential customers abroad. What makes this situation even more precarious for Harley-Davidson is the dual nature of the tariff impact. On one hand, the cost of manufacturing increases due to tariffs on imported raw materials and components. On the other, the demand for their finished products plummets as foreign markets slap additional fees on American goods. The resulting squeeze leaves little room for maneuvering. The company can't absorb all the added costs without drastically cutting into profits, and it can't raise prices without risking a collapse in sales volumes. As a business model, this scenario is unsustainable over the long term, and Zeitz's warning signals a recognition that Harley-Davidson is caught in a trade war crossfire it neither started nor can control. Internally, the financial toll is already showing. Operating costs have surged due to the new tariffs on steel and aluminum, core materials in motorcycle production. These price hikes ripple throughout the production line, from the engine to the frame, and finally to the dealer showrooms. Every layer of the company's supply chain is affected. Suppliers demand more for materials. Shipping costs rise due to port delays and increased duties. And ultimately, dealerships are forced to hike prices or offer deep discounts, neither of which is a long-term fix. The cumulative result is mounting financial pressure and dwindling profit margins. An unsustainable position for a company that also faces growing competition from more affordable and less tariff-exposed brands abroad. Moreover, Harley-Davidson has invested heavily over the past decade in expanding its global footprint. International markets were meant to be the future of the brand, especially as domestic sales plateaued and a younger generation in the US showed less interest in heavyweight motorcycles. These global expansion strategies now appear under threat. Markets in Asia and Europe that were once seen as ripe for growth are suddenly hostile terrain. Countries that once welcomed Harley's entrance are now erecting financial barriers that punish the company for its American origins. The very nature of these tariffs, retaliatory and politically motivated, underscores how Harley-Davidson is now entangled in a geopolitical struggle that disregards the commercial logic that once governed international trade. The implications go far beyond just Harley-Davidson. The company's struggles serve as a warning to other US-based manufacturers who depend on a global supply chain and international sales. Industries ranging from agriculture to automotive face similar pressures. When a government targets trade partners with tariffs, The assumption is often that such a strategy will revitalize domestic production by encouraging local sourcing and manufacturing. But the reality for most modern companies is that their operations are deeply intertwined with global suppliers, and suddenly, forcing a change introduces massive inefficiencies, higher costs, and logistical chaos. In Harley's case, this means reconfiguring supply chains that took decades to build, a costly and time-consuming endeavor that may not even yield better results. There's also the reputational damage to consider. Harley-Davidson's brand image has long been tied to a sense of Americana that appeals globally, but the politicization of its products, with consumers in other countries now associating Harley motorcycles with trade aggression, is hurting the brand in ways no marketing campaign can easily fix. Consumer sentiment in many key markets has turned. Where Harley once symbolized freedom and prestige, it is now in some cases seen as an emblem of political tension and economic nationalism. Such associations can be deeply damaging and long-lasting, especially in markets where consumers have many other choices and are increasingly sensitive to the political implications of their purchasing habits. The timing could not have been worse for Harley-Davidson. Already facing a generational shift in consumer preferences, with younger riders gravitating toward electric bikes or cheaper alternatives, the company was in the middle of a delicate transition. Under Zeitz's leadership, Harley was attempting to pivot its brand into new segments and modernize its image without alienating its core base. These included investments in electric motorcycles, smaller displacement models for urban environments, and more flexible financing programs. But those efforts require capital and stability, both of which are in short supply amid the trade conflict. The added costs from tariffs are draining resources that could have fueled innovation and adaptation. Harley's leadership faces a dilemma with no easy solution. Relocating production to avoid tariffs is one option, and the company has explored moving some manufacturing to Thailand and other locations. But this raises its own set of problems, from logistical hurdles to domestic backlash. Harley already faced criticism from U.S. political leaders and segments of its customer base when it first considered moving production abroad. Such moves, while financially rational, risk eroding the brand's patriotic appeal, a key part of its identity. On the other hand, standing pat and absorbing the financial hits is equally risky, with long-term viability at stake. The very question of what it means to be a made-in-America company is under scrutiny in a global economy where political borders no longer align neatly with business operations. The broader economic landscape also adds layers of complexity. Tariffs create uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison to long-term business planning. Companies thrive on predictability, in costs, in market access, and in regulatory environments. When these become volatile, companies either delay investments, scale back expansion, or retreat from international markets altogether. Harley-Davidson, like many U.S. companies, now faces a future clouded by political unpredictability. Trade policy, once the domain of carefully negotiated agreements and strategic economic thinking, has become a tool of political messaging and retaliatory posturing. This shift has left companies with fewer tools and less clarity about how to navigate their future. Domestically, the impact is already being felt in jobs and operations. Manufacturing plants are running under greater financial strain, and layoffs or reduced hours have become plausible scenarios as the company seeks to balance its books. Dealerships, especially those in regions heavily dependent on international tourists or export-driven sales, are reporting lower volumes and increasing inventories. The economic ripple effects reach far beyond Harley itself, touching suppliers, logistics providers, marketing firms, and even local economies that depend on the Harley-Davidson ecosystem. The company has long been a symbol of American manufacturing excellence. Its struggles now highlight the fragility of that image in an interconnected world. The trade policies that triggered this turmoil were predicated on the idea of protecting American jobs and industries. Yet for a company like Harley-Davidson, which straddles the line between domestic production and international market reliance, these policies are having the opposite effect. By making it more expensive to produce and sell motorcycles, the tariffs are threatening the very jobs and facilities they were intended to protect. Harley's predicament is thus emblematic of a broader economic contradiction. In an attempt to shield U.S. industry, the government has in some cases undermined it, especially when that industry's success depends on its global integration. One of the most troubling aspects of the tariff situation is the sense of inescapability it creates. For Harley-Davidson, there's no simple fix. Even if demand were to rebound slightly in the US, it would not be enough to compensate for the losses overseas. The company's infrastructure and financial models are built on a global scale, and that scale is now broken. Adjusting to this new reality will require time, investment, and a willingness to make painful decisions. It's not merely a matter of weathering the storm, it's about rewriting the entire playbook for a brand that was already undergoing transformation. The psychological toll on the company should not be underestimated either. Employees, investors, and longtime customers are watching closely, many with a growing sense of unease. Shareholder confidence has taken a hit, as reflected in volatile stock performance. Internal morale is likely affected as well, especially among those working in regions hit hardest by tariff-related cost-cutting. The cultural identity of Harley-Davidson, once a source of pride and unity, now risks being fractured by economic anxiety and external pressures. The question is no longer just about how the company will recover financially, but how it will preserve its soul during a time of unprecedented global upheaval. At a deeper level, Harley-Davidson's struggles illuminate the complexities of modern capitalism. In a world where goods are designed in one country, manufactured in another, and sold globally, the old models of protectionism don't function as intended. When a government tries to create national advantages by disrupting global flows, it often ends up hurting the very companies it aims to help. Harley-Davidson is the canary in the coal mine, signaling that the new rules of trade and commerce are fraught with unintended consequences. What begins as a policy to protect steelworkers or domestic industries can easily spiral into a broader conflict that affects entire supply chains and industries. The enduring image of Harley-Davidson, powerful, freewheeling, unmistakably American, stands in stark contrast to the constrained and uncertain position it now occupies. Once a champion of the open road, it is now a symbol of the closed borders and economic nationalism that have reshaped the global landscape. Jochen Zeitz's acknowledgement of the company's financial struggles is not just a corporate disclosure, it is a reflection of a broader shift in how businesses operate in a world where politics and economics are increasingly inseparable. The open road has never looked more treacherous, and for Harley-Davidson, the path forward will require more than just grit and chrome. It will demand a reimagining of what it means to thrive in a fractured world. The crisis facing Harley-Davidson continues to unfold along increasingly complex lines, with new dimensions of the company's financial predicament becoming evident as global economic forces evolve. As the ramifications of the Trump-era tariffs deepen, Harley-Davidson finds itself grappling not only with the tangible fiscal challenges, but also with strategic dilemmas that threaten to redefine its future. The problems extend well beyond the initial impact of import and export costs. They now reverberate across corporate strategy, product development, global alliances, and investor relations. These layers of disruption, while interconnected, each bring their own set of high-stakes decisions that Harley-Davidson must navigate in a market that has become increasingly fragmented and politicized. One of the foremost challenges the company now faces is the shift in global trade alignment. The retaliatory tariffs imposed by foreign governments have not only closed off key markets for Harley-Davidson, but have also incentivized the formation of new economic partnerships that deliberately sidestep American manufacturers. In Europe and Asia, trade alliances are increasingly excluding or penalizing U.S. companies, pushing international buyers toward regional alternatives. This rerouting of trade flows creates long-term disadvantages for American brands attempting to retain relevance abroad. Harley-Davidson is now contending with a buyer base that is being slowly re-educated to prefer local or tariff-free alternatives, a trend that may be irreversible even if tariffs were lifted tomorrow. This geopolitical realignment is particularly damaging for a company that had once viewed emerging markets as its savior. Over the past 2 decades, Harley-Davidson had shifted focus toward expanding its reach in countries like India, Brazil, and various Southeast Asian nations, hoping to tap into their growing middle classes. These economies, once welcoming, have now grown wary of U.S. trade policies and have in some cases responded by fostering domestic motorcycle manufacturing as a matter of national pride and economic resilience. Harley's hopes of dominating these markets have been dashed by the perception that American companies are too closely tied to unstable trade practices. The sentiment on the ground has changed. In nations where Harley-Davidson was once a novelty or a status symbol, it is now more often perceived as a risky, overpriced, and politically tainted purchase. Internally, the need for operational reorganization is growing more urgent by the day. The traditional structure that once sustained Harley-Davidson, centralized manufacturing with a strong U.S. base feeding a vast international network, no longer functions efficiently. The cost discrepancies between regions have grown too large to ignore. This has forced the company to re-examine the very framework of how it builds and distributes its motorcycles. One emerging solution is a form of regionalization, creating smaller, semi-autonomous manufacturing hubs in strategic locations outside of the U.S., tailored to serve their immediate regions. But this approach introduces complexity and product consistency, increases administrative overhead, and requires navigating new sets of labor laws, political climates, and supply chain vulnerabilities. Every regional operation becomes a microcosm of global business, with its own risks and expectations. The financial burden of attempting such a reorganization is staggering. Establishing new production facilities or significantly altering logistics networks requires massive capital investment at a time when Harley-Davidson is already under financial stress. Investors are unlikely to view such moves favorably unless accompanied by clear and convincing projections of long-term gain, and those projections are difficult to deliver with current market volatility. Furthermore, establishing international factories carries additional branding challenges, as every move to build outside the U.S. invites backlash from a domestic audience that closely associates the Harley brand with American manufacturing pride. Balancing these competing interests, financial viability, brand loyalty, and global adaptability, is a task fraught with risk. Another consequence of the tariff-driven downturn is its chilling effect on innovation. Harley-Davidson, like many heritage manufacturers, had been undergoing a technological evolution, slowly introducing electric models, exploring modular bike platforms, and testing advanced rider safety systems. These initiatives are critical to appealing to younger consumers and meeting evolving environmental regulations. However, with resources stretched thin, the budget for research and development is often the first to be scrutinized. The danger here is twofold. Not only does the company risk falling behind competitors in innovation, but it also fails to capture the interest of the next generation of riders, a demographic already elusive and increasingly skeptical of internal combustion motorcycles. Harley's predicament also underscores the limits of legacy branding in a volatile economic climate. While the Harley-Davidson name still carries cultural weight, brand equity alone cannot offset the price increases imposed by tariffs or compensate for loss of accessibility in global markets. For decades, Harley leaned heavily on its mystique, the rumble of its engines, the iconography of freedom, the rebel spirit. But these intangible assets, while powerful, do not exempt the company from economic realities. Even the most passionate brand advocates will hesitate to spend thousands more for a bike that has become unaffordable due to international policy changes. As a result, the brand's emotional appeal is being steadily eroded by economic pragmatism. This growing disconnect between brand identity and global pricing is particularly problematic in premium segments, where Harley has traditionally positioned itself. High-end motorcycles are not necessities. They are discretionary purchases, heavily influenced by cost and perceived value. In markets where purchasing power is already under strain, the added burden of tariffs turns what was once a luxury into an extravagance. Harley-Davidson is learning the hard way that prestige cannot overcome economic inaccessibility. Consumers who once aspired to own a Harley are now choosing more practical alternatives, often with fewer political strings attached. Supply chain disruption is another pressing issue. Tariffs have upended the delicate balance of global logistics that modern manufacturing depends upon. Parts that were once readily available at stable prices are now subject to erratic costs and unpredictable delivery times. Harley-Davidson suppliers are being squeezed just as tightly, and many are passing those pressures back up the chain. The knock-on effects include production delays, cost overruns, and quality control concerns, all of which further compromise the brand's position in the market. The company's long-standing commitment to quality craftsmanship is under threat, not from negligence, but from the realities of a stressed and fractured supply network. Financial institutions are also taking note of Harley-Davidson's worsening situation. Credit rating agencies have begun to reevaluate the company's debt levels and risk exposure. A lower credit rating would increase borrowing costs, limiting Harley's ability to secure loans for expansion, restructuring, or innovation. This tightening of financial options creates a vicious cycle. The company needs capital to adapt, but the conditions that demand adaptation are also undermining its access to capital. Harley-Davidson is increasingly forced to rely on internal cost-cutting measures and operational triage, rather than strategic investment, to manage its way through the crisis. Even marketing strategies are suffering under these constraints. In an environment of economic nationalism and heightened political scrutiny, advertising a distinctly American product to a global audience becomes a more delicate and sometimes controversial task. Messaging must be carefully tailored to resonate without provoking, to inspire without alienating. The tone of Harley's international campaigns is shifting, once loud and brash, now more subdued and adaptive, reflecting the company's new need for diplomatic marketing. This transition, while necessary, is also fraught with difficulty, as it often dilutes the very qualities that once set Harley-Davidson apart. Customer loyalty, traditionally one of Harley-Davidson's strongest assets, is being tested. While the company still enjoys a devoted fan base, that base is aging, and their purchasing habits are changing. Younger consumers, especially in international markets, are not only more price-sensitive but also more environmentally conscious and more attuned to political dynamics. They are quick to reject brands perceived as contributors to global discord or environmental harm. The Harley-Davidson of today must contend with a new generation of buyers who demand ethical production, corporate transparency, and affordability, none of which are easily delivered under the strain of international trade battles. The dealership network, a crucial interface between the brand and its customers, is also under pressure. Many dealerships, especially those located in export-heavy regions or near international tourist hubs, are seeing a decline in traffic and sales. Inventory sits longer on the showroom floor, and dealer profitability has declined. These independent businesses, which form the grassroots infrastructure of Harley-Davidson's outreach, are increasingly vocal about the need for strategic clarity and support. Some are even considering switching to other brands or diversifying their offerings, a move that could dilute Harley's presence and weaken its cultural footprint. A further complication arises from the legislative side. Regulatory responses to the trade war, including subsidies, tax relief programs, or stimulus packages, are often designed with a broad brush and fail to address the specific challenges of niche manufacturers like Harley-Davidson. As such, the company often finds itself either excluded from government support programs or forced to compete for limited resources with other struggling sectors. The lack of targeted relief exacerbates the company's financial woes and sends a message that its unique challenges are not being fully understood or addressed at the policy level. Employee morale and organizational cohesion are also at risk. Within Harley-Davidson's workforce, anxiety about the future is growing. Layoffs, benefit reductions, and hiring freezes may be necessary to preserve capital, but they also undermine the company culture and productivity. In a manufacturing environment where craftsmanship and brand pride are central to output quality, disengagement can have tangible effects. Zeitz and his leadership team must manage not only the financial strategy, but also the psychological well-being of thousands of employees who have invested their careers in the company's success. The cumulative weight of these challenges is staggering. What began as a targeted set of tariffs has snowballed into a multifaceted crisis that touches every corner of Harley-Davidson's business. The company is not merely reacting to economic headwinds, it is now operating in a fundamentally altered global environment where past assumptions about growth, trade, and consumer behavior no longer apply. Every decision carries greater risk, every misstep has amplified consequences, and every path forward is clouded by uncertainty. The road ahead will require not just resilience, but reinvention. And whether Harley-Davidson can rise to meet that test remains an open and pressing question. As the crisis surrounding Harley-Davidson intensifies, the contours of the challenge begin to stretch beyond economics and into the realm of institutional identity. The company now stands at the precipice of a strategic and existential inflection point. While it has weathered storms before, from declining domestic interest to competition from foreign manufacturers, the current pressure induced by geopolitical trade shifts is categorically different. This isn't merely a matter of economic downturn or shifting tastes, It's the result of a deliberately engineered global recalibration in trade philosophy, where nationalism supersedes commerce, and Harley-Davidson is left navigating a labyrinth of uncertainty with limited tools. One of the increasingly critical aspects of the current dilemma lies in the erosion of long-term planning. Corporations of Harley-Davidson's stature function most effectively through strategic foresight, 5, 10, even 20-year forecasts that guide investments, research, and expansion. The volatility introduced by international tariffs has short-circuited this process. The company is often forced into short-term decision-making, responding to policy changes, retaliatory tariffs, and shifting supply conditions with little room for proactive maneuvering. This reactive posture diminishes Harley-Davidson's ability to allocate resources effectively, undermines its ability to innovate, and puts it at a disadvantage compared to more agile competitors. This lack of strategic stability has also disrupted Harley-Davidson's relationships with its global partners. International distributors, parts suppliers, and even collaborative engineering firms are recalibrating their own plans to account for the unpredictability of working with an American brand deeply affected by U.S. policy decisions. These partners, who once considered their association with Harley-Davidson as a long-term investment, are now hedging their bets or pivoting to other brands that offer more stable prospects. The weakening of these relationships chips away at the intricate network of global collaboration that Harley has built over decades. The implications of this shift ripple through corporate governance as well. Within Harley-Davidson's boardrooms, traditional markers of performance, sales figures, operating margins, and return on investment are now entangled with unpredictable externalities. Board members, shareholders, and executive officers are grappling with a new paradigm where success may be contingent not just on execution, but on navigating trade policy and political sentiment. This introduces a new kind of corporate anxiety, where control over one's fate is diluted, and the role of the executive becomes as much about diplomacy and damage control as about product development and market penetration. Investor sentiment has evolved to reflect these tensions. The financial community is deeply attuned to risk, and Harley-Davidson is increasingly viewed through a lens of geopolitical exposure rather than pure operational performance. Institutional investors are beginning to reassess the wisdom of heavily backing companies that operate across borders without a clear path to tariff mitigation. As a result, Harley-Davidson's stock performance has become more susceptible to political headlines than product launches or consumer trends. The company's valuation now hinges on forces outside its control, weakening investor confidence and making it more difficult to secure funding or negotiate favorable financial terms. Marketing departments at Harley-Davidson face a parallel dilemma. Traditional campaigns rooted in American heritage, rebellion, and freedom, the very DNA of Harley's public image, are now entangled with the politics of nationalism. These themes, once seen as aspirational globally, are being reinterpreted through local cultural lenses that often carry baggage. In some regions, particularly where U.S. trade policy has triggered economic backlash, the symbolism of Harley-Davidson can evoke resentment or political resistance. As such, marketing teams are forced to redesign brand narratives to be locally palatable while maintaining core identity, a tightrope walk that risks diluting the brand or alienating its base. In addition to its marketing challenges, Harley-Davidson's outreach strategies are being fundamentally restructured. Events, rallies, and brand-sponsored rides that once served as community pillars in global markets are now increasingly difficult to organize due to cost constraints, reduced staff, and declining consumer engagement. The company has long relied on experiential marketing to create emotional bonds with consumers, a test ride, a rally in the Alps, a freedom ride across Japan. But the logistics of executing such events under current global tensions are increasingly prohibitive. As these opportunities fade, Harley loses one of its most powerful tools for consumer conversion and loyalty building. Digital engagement, while a growing focus, cannot completely substitute for physical brand immersion. While Harley-Davidson has been investing in online platforms and e-commerce, the nature of its product complicates the digital transformation. Motorcycles are tactile experiences. Buying decisions are heavily influenced by physical interaction, sound, and feel. The lack of international accessibility due to pricing barriers prevents potential customers in key regions from having this crucial interaction, which no digital campaign can fully replicate. Therefore, the online expansion, though necessary, is constrained in its effectiveness by the very essence of the product. The service and maintenance aspect of Harley-Davidson's operations also faces new stressors. Tariffs not only impact the sale of new bikes, but also the cost of replacement parts and accessories, many of which are produced or sourced internationally. This has created a cascade effect in the service department. Dealerships are facing increasing difficulties in maintaining inventory for parts and accessories. Service times are lengthening, costs are rising, and customer satisfaction is waning. For a premium brand where ownership experience is paramount, this degradation in service quality is a significant reputational risk. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Harley-Davidson's financial struggles after Trump's tariff moves? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.